guys, my name's Adam.
And I'm Jay.
And we are in Counter Wargaming.
And today we're on the floor again, continuing on our infinity table.
Yeah, we're going to make some bridges, we're going to fill some gaps, stairways, and do some cool detailing. So I hope you guys enjoy.
Check it out. So first things first, guys, we're going to cut our walls here that we built in the last video to be able to fit our bridges. Now we wanted these bridges to be able to span from piece to piece, from board section to board section, I should say. And we want them to all be universal. So we've actually, I think I discussed this briefly in the last video, but I'll go over it again. We've chosen to do them exactly halfway on the board section, just to make it so no matter which way we organize these sections, they'll all line up with each other. Whether there's a ditch or whether there's just straight wall against wall, it'll all line up. So as you see here, we just roughed in where we thought we would put them in the last video. This time we've actually corrected to make sure the measurements are exact, because we want it to look really nice when it's done. We don't want it to look ad hoc. So, as I believe I discussed in the last one as well, we've decided on 5 inches because we figured that would fit pretty much any size base, and also it makes it versatile for, like I say, other games, 40k, whatever. We can fit tanks and etc, etc. So, all I'm going to do, guys, is take my trusty skill knife, and now that we've put all these walls in, I'm going to try and get as close to a 90-degree angle as I can right on my marker line there, and just cut straight down. Oh, didn't hit the lock there. Bam. And same thing on the other side. As straight as I can. I'm looking at it from sort of a bird's eye view, straight up and down, and that sort of ensures that I get at least as close to a 90-degree angle as I can. So now here we're going to have to play a bit, because I need to get my knife on a line lined up with the pink surface. There we go. Just going to carve that out. And here you see I created a little bit of damage there. That's okay, because we're going to be covering that up after, as well as the seam between these two. So now that I've cut that out, I can just run across like this with my knife, flat against the pink. Bam, super easy. And just clean it up a bit. Now, like I say, it's really messy, but we're going to be cleaning all this stuff up before we get to any kind of painting or anything like that. That's all it is, guys. That's our space for our bridge. So we're going to do that on all the tiles, where we've decided to put them, where it's applicable to put them, and we're just going to go ahead and do that and come back to you at the next stage. So now we've cut out all our spaces for our bridges. There they are right there. We're going to clean up some of the damage and stuff later, make it look a little cleaner. But for right now, we're moving on to the next stage, which is going to be staircases. So, as you see, we cut out one in the earlier video. This one we just kind of roughed in, so much like the bridges as I explained earlier, now we've actually done exact lines where we want it to be. As you can see, our rough in was actually pretty close, but we've decided to do this measurement for a specific reason. So right here I've got 5 centimeters, which is 50 millimeters. So I can fit a 40 millimeter base nicely in there with a little bit extra room if we want to, add a railing or something. Also the 25 mil bases that way. So I've actually gone, I believe 6 centimeters here. Yep, 6 centimeters. So that, again, if we're going to do 2 steps, that leaves just enough for a 25 with a little bit extra space for play. Walk up, next one, and so on. So that's our sizes, and that's why we did that. You guys can do the same if you like. So all I'm going to do next is take the same knife I used to cut out the other ones and try and, again, look at it from above so I can get as close to a 90-degree cut as possible into this foam. And I'll just get a nice score line going there, following my marker line. Get it as straight as possible. In fact, it might actually be less problematic if you have a metal ruler. You can use the ruler to kind of help you draw a straight line if you're not very good at drawing straight lines from eye. So now I felt that it went through that. You can actually feel it give a little bit once it goes through the first layer, but I don't want to cut too much into the second layer. If I do, it's not the end of the world, but I don't want to be taking off the second layer. I just want to take off the first layer. Same thing here. Let's get the very edge of my marker line there. Once again, if I cut a little bit outside it, that's okay. We're going to be filling all our gaps and cracks and all that stuff later in this video. Right now, we're just roughing in the details. So I think that went all the way through. You know, just run over it one more time just to make sure I've gone all the way through. Yeah, I felt it move there. You can see it wiggle as I cut. The piece that I'm removing is moving a bit, so that's good. And then hopefully, we didn't put too much white glue or hot glue down here. There's a little bit. So I can just take my knife and slowly get in underneath it. If I have to break it a little bit, we're going to be covering this square up with pieces of foam core. So I'm going to do like one big piece and then one half-size piece. So if the bottom of this looks really rough after I rip this out, I'm not going to be crying about it. Yeah, there we go. Bam. That's not too bad. Got a little bit of cut there, but that's only because I had to get my knife up in there. There was clearly a glob of hot glue there, but that's okay. So like I said, we're going to be covering this up now. We're going to maybe even have 2. We intended on 2. We could even do 3, whatever, if we feel we need to. So there it is. So we're just going to go around, and anywhere we think it might be nice to put a staircase, we're going to put a staircase. And that's all it is. Just cut out, rip it out, and the next step we're going to be throwing down some more foam core. So this one here, we kind of had a different idea. Since we had this rather large area here, we thought maybe it would be cool if we put like a corner staircase. So because we got a bridge coming in here, we got a bridge coming in here, maybe it'd be nice. So we just roughed in again, just to sort of show you guys that we're going to do multiple steps, and we're going to do them on sort of a 45 here. This solid line you see here is actually what I'm going to be cutting. And then we're going to put triangles, a large triangle, a smaller one, and a smaller one to create steps. Again, we've measured them in, so I've done this, I think, 9 centimeters by 9 centimeters, and that gives us just enough for at 30. I think I actually did them at 35, because it's a 25 mil base, because of the weird corner. We actually want to be able to fit on that step, otherwise it would be silly that they can't actually fit on the steps. We want this to be applicable for game purposes, so that's pretty perfect right there. And just like the other, I'll move these models off just so they don't get damaged. Just like the other one, I'm just going to cut out the corner. Again, trying to look at it from a bird's eye view. Maybe I'll even use the metal ruler to create a straighter line. Score along my ruler. And then just wing it from there, now that I have a line to follow. And again, guys, if I'm cutting a little bit into the layer below, that's okay. We're going to be texturing this board and covering up all these crazy cuts. I love that squeak. Nope, there's some glue. Same thing, I'm just going to run my knife here to kind of cut what hot glue globs I put there before when we glued these guys down. Didn't come out as clean as I'd like, but that's okay. There's clearly a glob right there. Yeah, you can see the 2 globs. And there it is. I can even just take my knife, shave this guy off a little bit. Because I don't want it to be higher, so I'm going to be putting triangles on top of here. If it's a little bit lower than the original surface, that's okay, because we're going to be covering it up. But if it's higher, my stairs will be lopsided, and that'll just look weird. Perfect. That's all it takes. Okay, so first detail, guys. We've got now our stairs cut out. So we just cut these off camera just to make it easy to show you guys. So the measurements I showed you in the last shot, we did this 90 by 90. That was so that we had 30 millimeters here on each step. I think this one's actually 35 because of this corner. We wanted to still be able to fit a base on there. We didn't want it to be pushed off because of the corner. So there you go. Literally all I've done is cut one triangle, the full 90 by 90, and then just drawn a 45. This one, I literally just mapped out how far in I wanted it to be and drew a 45-degree angle. Bam. And just like our other pieces that we've done, as far as like laying down the insulation foam and stuff like that, I am just going to line this guy with white glue, with hot glue. There you go. That's how easy it is, guys. Now we wanted to show you the triangular one because that's actually the more complicated one. If Adam pans over here to these guys, we've got the square opening there. Now this one I actually doubled up because this foam is almost an inch, whereas this foam is half an inch, so I had to double up the steps, but that's fine because guys can jump up that, no problem. And all that is, again, a larger square and then a smaller square. And then later we're going to close these seams, and we'll show you how to do that later. So the next detail we wanted to go over with you guys is the bridges. So as we showed you earlier, we cut out our little spots for the bridges to go from board section to board section. And then what we've done here, again, I've cut them all off camera, but it's pretty straightforward. We've cut 5" by 5" squares, and that's going to be our actual bridges. And then Ab and I took a little journey to Home Depot, and we found a nice roll of this screening, this mesh, which, yeah, so we got this massive roll of it at Home Depot. It wasn't very expensive. I think it was like $8 or something for the roll, maybe $12 for the roll. And it'll easily do, what was it, 3 feet by 8 feet or something like that. So there's a lot of mesh. This is actually for screen doors and stuff like that, so people can replace the screen in their screen door. But we're going to use this to create sort of like a metal texture on the bases. So we're going to be doing it on the bridges as well as on the pink foam. So right now we're just focusing on the bridges. We've just cut it just a little bit bigger than our 5 by 5 bridges. So that what we can do is put it down, make sure it's nice and smooth, and then afterwards we're just going to take an X-Acto knife and trim off the excess. But again, providing cover for our models and also lining the bridge, we're going to have, we've got these guys already cut at 5 inches long, and then we've just tapered off the edges there, just so it looks nice and flows from one part of the table into the other. So I've got one already done for you here. And this right now is just hot glue holding on the sides. As you can see, there's nothing holding this mesh on right now. So all I've done, I'll show you on this one, is I'm going to lay this out on my 5 by 5 piece. Try and get it as square as possible with the existing edges so that these guys aren't like, you know, way off skew and look all weird once we paint them. We want them to look somewhat square, as if it was a patterned metal. And then just holding this down, I'm going to take my hot glue and run a bead along one edge. And put one of these guys right there. Now I've got a little bit of squeeze out. If you can, try and get the squeeze out on the outer side, because it's like I said, we're going to take a knife and trim all this mesh off. We can trim the glue off at the same time. I've got a little bit of squeeze out on this side of the wall, which is not the end of the world, but you want to try and avoid it because it avoids me having to do this after. I'm going to have to take my knife and try and peel that out without getting too much of the glue into the mesh, because I don't want to ruin detail. So now that I've got the one side on, I'll let it, you know, harden nicely so that it's not going anywhere. It's not going to come off. If I can give it a nice little pull, it's not going to come off. The reason I'm doing one at a time is because now I want to get this as flat as possible. Now you can see on my existing one, it's not exactly fully flat. There's a little bit of bubble here and there. We want to try and avoid that as much as possible, but for now, I mean, it is what it is. It's not the end of the world. Everything is fixable later. It's just the less you have to fix later, the less time it'll take to build this stuff. So I'm just going to kind of flatten it down with my hand as much as I can, get it as tight to the foam core as I can. And then the same thing. I'm going to throw a bead along the edge. Ooh, that was a little too much. Probably going to get some squeeze out from that, but that's not, again, not the end of the world. And then I'm going to take this and kind of smooth and pull the mesh so that I don't get as much bubbles. Also, this will force my squeeze out this way. And then just kind of flatten it down. Now, thanks to hot glue, as we've mentioned in earlier videos, it gives me a little bit of time to move it around a little bit until it fully hardens. And that's how easy it is. This one's actually better than the last one. It's not as many bubbles. So I'm going to trim this off camera. So the final stage for the bridges, now that we've got them together, before I start trimming all this, is I actually want to, like I said before, there was some bubbling going on with the screen. So what I'm going to do is take my white glue. We've just used some LePage gigantic bottle here. Much cheaper than buying it in small bottles. I'm just going to take a whole bunch of white glue, pour it out like that. Now I'm going to thin it down with a little bit of water. And you can just do that by just dropping it on with the brush and mix it all up. Now I don't want it too thin, so I've actually mixed it a little too thin here, I think. So I'll just add more glue. Because I want it to be tacky, but I also want it to flow throughout the mesh and sort of hold it down onto my foam core. But I don't want it to be so globby that it's going to destroy the detail of the mesh, because the whole point of putting the mesh was to get some nice detail on this piece, give it a texture. So I'm just going to start painting the whole thing with it. And like I said, don't put on too thick, guys, otherwise you'll cover up all these nice lines here. But we do want it thick enough that it holds it down. So I think the fact that I'm seeing the grid through the glue gives me a good indication that it is not so thick that it's going to cover up the detail of the grid. Plus this will add a nice protective layer to the foam core, because foam core always flakes sometimes and stuff. And yes, we're going to be painting it afterwards, but this will actually create like a nice protective coat. And once Adam works his magic on here, it'll look just like metal, or at least mesh, metal, grating stuff. Okay. That's that. I'm just going to smooth it down off here because I don't want globs all over my rails. And anywhere it starts to sort of thin out too much, I'm just going to run over it again with the brush. Make sure it's nice and even all the way across, because the glue does soak into the paper a bit. And again, I don't want any globs in the corners, so I'll just smooth it out. And once it's painted, hopefully you won't notice that there's a layer of glue on there. So I think that's good. Now we're going to let that dry, and then once it's dry, we're going to take a knife and trim off all the excess of both the glue and the mesh that we've had squeezed out there, and get ready for painting. So now that we've got our bridges built and stuff like that, we're going to move back onto our tiles now. So these are our individual bore sections that you've seen before. As you saw earlier, we cut out our little bits for our bridges here. So what we're going to try and do now is smooth out some of the imperfections and stuff that we've got going on with the board. So of course we've got where this pink meets the black foam core. We've got this seam here, as well as the choppiness of our knife. Over here, yeah, show a good shot of that. Over here we've got areas where we have multiple pink going together. So I'm going to want to cover that. As well, the edges of the foam board are very porous, and of course where we've butted them up against each other on the edge, on the very ends here, there is of course a seam. So we're going to want to kill that. Now this one's moving a bit. If you get where there's some moving a little bit like that, you don't want it to stay moving, because we're going to fill this crack, and if it's continuing to move, it will crack again in the future. So I'm just going to put a little bit of hot glue, if I have any of that, and just make sure it's nice and sturdy before I start filling it. So now that that's on there, I'm going to check all the other ones, just make sure. Yeah, I think we're pretty good in most spots. That one's got a big gap, but that's okay. Okay, whatever. So, if you're going to pan over here at them, we are using polyfilla. It's just your standard crack filler that you would use to fill cracks in your walls and stuff before you put a new coat of paint. We bought a gigantic, almost 3-liter bin of it here, which is just, it'll last you forever if you want to buy it with this. The problem is you can see some of it starting to dry up over multiple uses. You can buy them in individual squeeze tubes, you can buy them in tubes for a caulking gun, or, yeah, Adam's just reaching for it here. You can buy them in much smaller containers as well, which are less likely to dry up on you. This is just less than 1 liter in this one. This is almost 3 liters, so I guess this is 3 times. 2.7 versus 900 mil, so yeah, that'd be 3 times. And so we're just going to take this and we're going to fill some of our imperfections. So first off, I'm just going to use my finger. You can use a putty knife if you don't want to get your fingers dirty, but honestly I'm not being too precise here, so I'm just going to use my finger. And this area here where the foam core meets the pink, I'm going to actually take it and kind of brush it off the edge like this. So we want to make sure that when you cut the foam core, like I showed you guys earlier, it is actually just slightly lower than the pink, because you don't want it to curl up once you put this on. We want to be able to sand it afterwards now and make it nice and flat. So it's not, so A, there's not a seam there, there's no porous foam core, and no choppiness from my knife blade. So I'm just doing that. It's not really complicated at all. And it doesn't have to look too pretty right now, because like I said, we're going to sand it later and make it nice and flat before we go ahead and paint it. So that's all it is. Over here I'm going to do the same thing where they meet. I'm going to put a nice thick glob on the seam. Just kind of fill that crack in between. And again, just globbing on nice and thick. Don't have to be too pretty with it, because I'm going to take some sandpaper to it later and make it all nice and flat before we lay down the texture on the surface. Yep, so I'm just grabbing a little bit more on my finger here, and this is actually the just as easy. I'm going to fill all these little pores here, and again we're gonna sand it all flat. So right now when we cut these, they're not quite a perfectly straight line. Some of them are a little bit lumpy as well. We've got a lot of pores there, which aren't impossible to paint, but aren't easy to paint. So it's just easiest if you just kind of run your finger on the edge and just kind of let it come off your finger onto the edge there. And then afterwards just run your finger flat along the surface and flatten that out. Now it doesn't have to be perfectly flat, like I say. Right now we're just getting it on there, getting it to get into all the little pores. And afterwards we're going to flatten it off with some sandpaper. And that's all it is, really, guys. I mean, we're going to also attempt the corners here, so actually maybe I'll spin that around so you can see it better from the other side. And very similar to what I did on the little recessed area there where the bridges are. Sorry, I'm just trying to get a little bit on my finger here. I'm just going to take it and glob it on and brush it off the edge like that. Create it so that it fills that sort of crack between very easily. And then, like I say, we're going to take some sandpaper and just make that nice. And that's literally it, guys. I'm going to go all the way around the entire thing. We're going to do this on all the sections of our table, and hopefully when we're done, it'll look a hell of a lot prettier than it does now. Okay, so all our polyfiller is dry now. As you can see, it looks pretty lumpy and gross, but we're going to fix that. So actually, we're gonna take this basically lumpy mess right now and make it more like this. So I've sanded this one off camera already, just so I can sort of give you guys an example. And it looks kind of messy. As you can see, all our knife cuts and all that kind of stuff. That's why we use the polyfiller, because now I can run my hand over it, and it is a nice, flat, smooth surface. You don't see the seam between the foam core and the pink, especially after we paint it. We're actually going to put a texture down first, and then we're going to paint it, so you won't see any of the lumpy, like this mess right here. It's just, as long as you can feel it and it's nice and flat, you know you've done the right thing. So right here I've got 180 grit sandpaper. I would not suggest using a super coarse sandpaper for this stuff, like an 80 or a 60, because this stuff's so fragile. In fact, you can see this little chunk here. I can just break it off with my finger. So if you use something too coarse, it'll actually just start pulling pieces off, and you'll have to go over it again, and you'll just ruin the entire thing. So I would suggest using a 150 or finer. It's just the more fine the sandpaper you use, the quicker it will fill up with filler. So we've chosen a 180 for this. You can use a sanding block if you want, like just wrap this around a piece of wood and to give you a nice flat sand, just simply because sometimes your fingers can create a little bit of a gouge. But if you watch what I'm going to do here, to avoid that, as I sand this, as you see, I'm working my way across. So if you focus in one area too much, you're going to create a little dip. And you don't want that. We want it to be nice and flat so we can lay down our screening to make this a nice metal surface. So I'm just going to start going at it. Again, moving back and forth with my hand so that I don't create any dips anywhere. And more or less I'm just going to keep going until I don't see the filler on the surface of either piece anymore. Like as I showed you over here, we've got some gouge. Like this is actually where our X-Acto knife went in. So when we were cutting these out, as you saw in the earlier scene, we kind of wanted to go on a lower angle so that we have something to sort of smooth out afterwards. So these are just our knife cuts, and that's still going to be there. You'll never get rid of those unless you start sanding down further, which is going to make it look horrible. So right here you can see how I've still got little bubbles and things where the bubbles were in the filler. I want to kind of smooth those out. Like that, and now we're seeing the pink. So here we can see where I got one of my knife gouges, and that's what the filler is for, to fill that, as well as the seam between the black and the pink. And right from there to there is pretty much what I'm going for. So at that stage, I'm pretty much done. Now, the corners are a bit of a mess because, as you see here, we've lined this to try and fill that sort of foam. So I'm going to take my X-Acto knife, just because it's more precision. You can use a putty knife or a little chisel or something just to kind of get this glob out of the corner. Because otherwise, when I start to sand it, I'll end up with like a rounded thing instead of a sharp corner. So I'm just going to use this knife to kind of square it off. It's easier to come at it from this side to get a nice flat. And you see how easily this stuff chips out, guys. So be very careful because you don't want to have to redo it a bunch of times. If you guys know of a substance that maybe could fill this and is a little bit stronger than the polyfiller, I'd love to hear it. So comment below. Now that I've got a nice corner, I'm going to do that. Again, moving back and forth with it. And that's pretty much what I'm going for. Now on the edge here, just carefully, up and down. Sometimes if you go side to side like this, you can start peeling off the Bristol board that's lining the foam core, so we want to do an up and down motion. And that's pretty much it. So then even you see here how some of the black's showing and then there's white here. That's because our cut was actually a little bit crooked. It was like an S shape. And that's the beauty of this filler now. So that I can sand it so it's a nice straight edge. And then once we paint it, you won't even be able to tell. So again, I've got a little bit of fray here from the Bristol board. Like I was sort of commenting, if you go this way with it, you'll make that even worse. But now we're just going to go this way and flatten it off. Luckily it's paper, it sands pretty easily. And that's more or less it. Now on the top here, I'm just going to go light. I don't want to take it all off. So I took it off a bit, but as you can see now, it's a nice flat surface. So not only is the foam core porous, but with our cuts, even though we were using rulers and stuff, Again, our cuts will be a little bit crooked. I mean, we are human. We're not machines cutting with lasers and stuff. So this just makes a nice flat top on it. And then same thing on the sides. Just very quickly run like this. That's all there is to it. And it's going to take a long time, but we're going to, both me and Adam are just going to go around and sand this entire table. So if you guys have been doing this with us at home, pause it here, take a couple hours, and go around and sand your entire table. So we'll see you at the next stage. So Adam and I are done getting messy, sanding off all this filler now. So as you see, we flattened off these areas. We kind of flattened off all the way around the outside. Hopefully to try and make it look a little nicer once we paint it. It doesn't actually look like foam core. Now, some of this stuff we're kind of learning as we're going along. I mean, we're kind of making this up as we go along. So a couple of the areas don't really look as nice as I intended, but if you guys have more patience than we do, maybe you can take the time and sand all this stuff to make it look a little bit nicer than we've done. But I think we're content with where it's at. So our next step then is we're going to take our screening, just like we did on the bridges, and we're going to try and texture the entire board with it, at least the pink sections, the raised areas. So we kind of, like I say, I've been kind of figuring this out as we go. We had an overall game plan, but we've kind of changed our overall game plan as we've been going. So this wasn't intended originally. We were gonna like maybe make this as concrete or whatever, but now we liked the look of this on the bridges, so we've decided to do this everywhere. So looking back now, it would have been a lot easier if we had glued this screening down to the pink before we put on the outside walls you guys saw us do in the like earlier in this process. But we are where we are. We've gone as far as we have, so we're going to make it work with what we have. So at this point, we've sanded these guys flat, the filler here on where the bridges are going to connect and stuff, just so that we can have this actually just taper off the edge or flow off the edge. So at this point, all I've done is cut this slightly bigger than the actual square. Now, if you try and cut it to the exact size, you're going to find yourself running into issues when you try to put it into the corner here, when you try and have it just a little bit longer to come off the edge. So we've kind of decided to combat this by just putting the glue on to the edge, but not touching the foam core, because we actually don't want to glue this onto the foam core. Otherwise, it'll be a gigantic pain in the butt to trim afterwards. So we're going to stop like a few millimeters away from the foam core border with our glue and just kind of have it like that. And then once the glue dries, I can take my knife and cut off the extra, hopefully. So what we do have to do first, though, is find out where our bridges are going to go. So I'm just going to lay this down on top, and I've decided that that is kind of where the first bridge is going to be. And luckily, because this stuff is actually a grid pattern, it makes it super easy for me to have a line to follow, to be able to put this down. So I want it to be as straight as possible. If it's not quite square, it's not the end of the world, but I want it to look as nice as possible. I mean, we are going to be using this table on our battle reports, so we want it to be as pretty as we can make it for the camera and for you guys. It's the same thing here. I'm just going to try and trim that maybe a little bit further just so it actually sits flat there. And as long as I can fold it over like that and have it sit flat, my cuts are deep enough. This one I might actually want to cut a little bit more. Okay, that's good there. Now in this one I actually have two of these cut in areas for the bridges. So keeping that one in place and pulling this as flat as possible gives me the line there. Now this stuff cuts pretty easily, you'll find, with a sharp X-Acto knife, but if you don't have a lot to pull on, it's very hard to cut actually with this. So you need just that little bit, maybe cut it a ½ inch extra or an inch extra. So make sure when you're going to the hardware store and buying this stuff, buy the biggest roll you can get, because we bought the biggest roll we could get and it's barely enough to cover our table. So grab as much as you can, because you want to have extra, you want to have excess. There we go. So now, I'm going to get crazy with white glue. And just throw it down everywhere. And I'm literally just covering the entire surface with white glue, just like we did on the bridges. But I got a little smaller brush this time, because I'm going to be a little more careful about edges and stuff. Like I say, I don't want to glue it onto the foam core. I just want to glue it to the pink foam. I don't really want a lot around the black foam core. And don't be sparing with it. Be real liberal with it, because we want as much as possible. Now I'm going to water this down a bit, but the less water I have, the more tack I'll get, and the more it'll hold down, which is good for this particular circumstance. So, if you can see, we got a jar of water off to the side here with some big fat brushes. Now, not super fat, because we are going to want to get to sort of finer brush strokes near the edges, but in the center we're just going to brush it around a lot. And just get as much on there as we can. And you'll find as you're working, it'll actually start to stick to the pink pretty well, actually, even while it's wet. It doesn't peel up as much. And if you need to, just keep adding glue wherever it's sparse. Get it on there nice and thick. Not too thick that you have gigantic globs, but just thick enough that it holds it down and sticks nicely. Because if you have a lot of peel up afterwards, it's going to be a real hard time trimming this off. You want to stick it down as much as possible. Now to show you guys a little trick we found as we were doing this, when you're getting near the corners here, you're going to find it's going to want to raise up, because of course it's curled up on the corners. Are you showing them? It's curled up on the corners here. What you can do is actually take the ass end of your brush and just kind of force it down a bit, like that. And surprisingly enough, the white glue is pretty tacky. It will mostly hold it down. Now again, we don't want to get too close. I'm actually getting a little bit on the foam core. That's bad. I don't want that to happen, because I want to be able to cut this just shy afterwards with my knife. So if one of these rows is like 1 millimeter, I want to keep it like maybe 2 millimeters away, so that I can trim it off afterwards. There we go, that's a little better. Hold that one a little better there. And just have fun with it, guys. Spread that glue all over the place. Get crazy. It's like arts and crafts time. And of course on the bridges here, I want to get it on nice and thick, because we want those to really stick down. And we can be a little more liberal with it here because they run off the edge. I don't have to be so careful about stopping at a certain point, and just take it right off the edge. A little bit more there. Smooth it down nice. And that's more or less the entire strategy for now. We'll come back at you when we've done the entire table and it's dry, and we can start trimming, and then we'll show you guys how we're actually going to cover these edges so that it doesn't look like it stops before the wall and looks messy. We're going to clean it up and make it look real nice. So, see you then.
Yeah, cool. Go for it.
Recording?
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so our white glue is dry, so looks pretty messy right now, but I'm going to show you guys how we're going to clean it up. So just to start, we're going to start by trimming off all the excess screening. So right here we've got kind of an overlap. I'm going to try and get my knife as close as possible, obviously to where my other piece starts. And you'll find with a really sharp knife that this stuff cuts very easily. And don't worry about getting some knife marks in the foam underneath. That's not going to affect anything, because we're going to show you guys in the next video where we do all the details on this table and clean everything up for real, how to cover all these little indiscretions. Oop. Bam. Okay. Just finish that off. Just that easy, guys. So then the corners here, these are actually even easier because I don't have to like really pull on it that much. I mean, I will hold it a little bit, but more or less I'm putting my blade right down into the corner where the foam core meets the pink foam and just going right across. Again, don't worry about if you put a massive knife gouge in your corner there, because it's going to be covered later on. Cool. As long as you follow the corner, you should have a pretty straight line. And if you have a sharp enough knife, it just makes it that easy. That's basically it. I mean, really, that's the last step. So we're gonna go around and add a bunch of details to cover up stuff like this, clean up the corners. So check out the next video in this series where we'll show you all that. We're also gonna add some further details, like just make the board a little more interesting before we get to the painting step. So that's it for today, guys. That's really the last step for now. So if you want to see the next stage that we're going to take this, we're going to clean up a lot of the damage that we've done, as well as, you know, even out the seams here, like where I just cut. So that'll be in the next video. So check out the next video in this series as it comes. So hit subscribe below and you will be apprised of when that comes out. Also, if you like our terrain videos and like what we're doing here, please jump on our Patreon. The link is below. It's what basically allows us to do what we do. So for as little as $1 a video, you're gonna help fuel future projects like this. Also, if you want to keep up to date with what we're doing, not just on camera, but also off camera, check out all our other social media, also in the description below. And until our next encounter.
Like a monkey in a rocket on its way back home.